Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and today's subject is putting the world of pollination on its head, really. We often hear about bee-friendly plants and how you should plant bee-friendly plants in your garden and things like this. Well, today I'm going to talk about bee-unfriendly plants and explain what this means. And there are a number of plants out there that are not always best for the health of bees. And you might think this is strange, because, bees and flowers evolved together. But sometimes one side takes an unfair advantage. So first of all, think about bees feeding on the nectar of rhododendron plants. They can build up toxins in the honey that they produce. And so if you are consuming that honey, you can actually get poisoned. The concentration of the chemical responsible is called gravinotoxin, also called acetyloandromedol. Easy for me to say. It can be high enough to be toxic to humans when the honey is ingested. And this has led to beekeepers being concerned about the plants around their hives. So very different to, most honey, local honey and things like this. Gravinotoxin is also present in Kalmier. So if you go in Kalmier plants, which is responsible for toxicity to livestock that is given the common name. So this plant, Kalmier, it's got the common name lambskill because it kills lambs, and this chemical can get into the honey. Other potential sources of poisonous nectar contain honey is the strawberry tree. That's native to the UK. It's native to the British Isles, but it only grows on the west coast of Ireland. So to say it's native to the British Isles is a bit disingenuous, but it grows in lots of places in Europe and other places. It's a coastal plant, the strawberry tree, arbutin unido. It doesn't produce real strawberries, but it does produce edible crop, but it can produce poisonous nectar. So the problem here is that the strawberry tree, the nectar is toxic to the bees themselves due to the presence of the toxic compound arbutin. And then you'll see a lot of these chemicals have complicated scientific names like arbutin, but actually that's just a chemical named because it's the scientific name for the strawberry tree is arbutus. So they just need to give it arbutin to say that's the chemical from that tree. So it's quite simple when you realize. So both strawberry tree and rhododendron belong to the heather family, the Ericaceae. And we often think of like heather honey as being particularly good, they think, it's from heathland and things like this, but can actually be bad. So if you're growing these plants, might be best to exclude bees from your glass house or your grow room. They are ornamental plants that are grown a lot. So there are big growers of these ornamental plants. So potentially you might want to exclude bees from the growing environment, especially if you've got honey production nearby. So that's interesting. There's a sugar called galactose that is excluded from tulip flowers and is toxic to bees. So who knew that tulips were not bee-friendly? And the mannose sugar in lime trees flowers is thought to be toxic to honeybees. So lime trees, they're not lime as in, key lime pie or margaritas and things like this. It's the lime tree, that Tilia, that's native to the UK, very common tree species. So why would plants produce something such as nectar for a pollinator and then poison them? It remains unresolved. One hypothesis is that the toxic compounds are produced in such high concentrations in other parts of the plant to prevent herbivory from animals eating it. The plant simply cannot stop a small amount making it into the nectar. Okay. A second theory, a hypothesis, is that the poison prevents the pollinators taking too much nectar and makes them move on to another flower more quickly. This is thought to be why ornamental tobacco plants lace their nectar with nicotine. So nicotine will be toxic to bees. It's a highly toxic insecticide, nicotine. And so there is nicotine in the nectar. And so the bees will move on once they've consumed too much nicotine. Probably highly wired and focused bees after they've been to the tobacco, the nicotiana plants. So that'll be interesting. I'm planting some of those next year in my garden. So it'll be interesting to look how absolutely wired the bees look. And bees have been observed to avoid flowers producing nicotine-rich nectar and they show no signs of nicotine addiction as a human would. Oh, there you go. Another hypothesis comes from studies on orchids, and many orchids are thought to intoxicate or drug their pollinators, with the results being the bees slow down, stumble, and take more time in the flowers. And if they're doing that, then they're going to dislodge more pollen by their erratic movements, and this could explain why other plants also disrupt correct flight and movement in bees. Consequently, if you want to ensure a healthy bee population for pollinating your garden or your grow room, you might want to consider not planting those particular species. Other plant species that are bee unfriendly are doubles. So if you don't know what double is, it's where the parts of the petals in the flower have been doubled up due to a mutation. And the way flowers are arranged, it's all genetically encoded, and so they have different whorls, different circles. So the inner bits should be the female parts, the stigma, then the anthers, the male parts, then the petals, then the sepals on the outside and things like that. But in doubles, they've got multiple sets of petals instead of the reproductive bits. And if the nectaries have been removed due to that mutation, then the bees can't get in, and just having a double set of petals often means that the pollinators can't access the nectaries. So a lot of ecologists try and persuade people not to grow doubles. So I'm growing hollyhocks next year in my garden alongside the tobacco plants, and I will be growing doubles and standard hollyhocks. And my theory is that there's already enough. By just simply planting a plant, you're encouraging biodiversity. So you don't always have to be obsessed with the bees. And there'll be loads of other bee-friendly plants in my garden as well. So doubles are always considered to be bee unfriendly. And there are lots of different mutations and lots of different ornamental flowers that are considered doubles. And so they will be considered unfriendly to pollinators. Other plants that are unfriendly to pollinators are wind-pollinated plants. So your conifers, your grasses, things like this. They're not going to be friendly to bees because they've not evolved to be pollinated by bees, and they don't provide any reward for the bees. I suppose you could say like a lawn provides a place for bumblebees to nest and things like this. But yeah. So think about the crop you're growing. Is it bee-friendly? Is it bee-unfriendly? Is it wind-pollinated? Is it doubles? Is it a mutant flower? Does it produce a highly active biochemical that could potentially drug or poison the bee or taint its honey? Things like that. We are obsessed a bit in the UK with honeybees and protecting honeybees, but they are actually an alien species brought in by the Romans. There are lots of other native bee species that we should really concentrate on protecting rather than honeybees. And yeah, so we can't overemphasize the importance of bees at times, but they're important parts of the ecosystem. We can say that for certain. So bee unfriendly species. If you know any others that you think are bee unfriendly, then let me know. Interestingly, carnivorous plants are not on that list because carnivorous plants are adapted not to catch pollinators. They keep their flowers above their traps on a long spike. You often see with a carnivorous plant like a Venus flytrap or a pitcher plant, flowers are held on a spike much higher above the trap to avoid pollinators getting trapped. So they catch things like fungus gnats down by the soil surface. And so you wouldn't actually consider carnivorous plants to be bee unfriendly. Although if a bee did go inside the trap, it would get caught, but it wouldn't probably go in there because it's not hunting for the sorts of things that the carnivorous plants tricking the things like blue bottles and flies and fungus gnats into to get, they're after meat and lay egg, they're maggots and on rotting meat and things like this. So bees, they're not concerned with rotting meat and things like that. So yeah, that's interesting. Other things that might be pollinator unfriendly or bee unfriendly, magnolias, any of those sorts of plants that are quite ancient flowering plants, so tulip tree, magnolias, they've evolved to be pollinated by beetles, where the beetle eats the flower rather than gets nectar and pollen. So if you were growing just loads of magnolias in your garden, or you were growing a tulip tree nursery and things like this, then they would, what's the other one? Sugar apple. If you've got loads of sugar apples in your hydroponic setup, then they wouldn't be encouraged by bees. That would be beetles, I think, are the main pollinators of sugar apples. But if you know different let me know. Okay, that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. An interesting clickbaity title, Bee-unfriendly plants. Thank you very much for listening. Until tomorrow, goodbye.